What if I told you that the value of your money, your savings, your paycheck, your entire financial future is not determined by the economy or the market, but by a small group of institutions making decisions behind closed doors? What if currency value isn't a natural force like gravity or weather, but a manufactured outcome, a lever pulled intentionally to shift wealth from one group to another? We are taught that currencies rise because an economy is strong and fall because an economy is weak. But history tells a very different story. From ancient empires to modern superpowers, currency value has always been a weapon engineered, manipulated, defended, and sometimes deliberately destroyed. And the people taught to believe that money is stable, safe, and rational. They are always the ones holding the bag when the system resets. Think of your own life. Have you noticed your groceries getting more expensive? Your rent rising? Your savings buying less each year? Most people experience inflation, wage stagnation, and debt pressure long before they understand what caused it. That is not an accident. Currency manipulation is the hidden mechanism behind nearly every economic crisis. And once you understand how it works, you will never look at money the same way again. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. It blows my mind to see how far these ideas travel, and how many people are waking up to the reality behind their money. And if you want more truth that schools never bothered to teach, hit the subscribe button, because today, we're uncovering one of the biggest economic illusions ever created. Because the story of how currency gains or loses value is not a story about markets. It's a story about power. It always has been. When we think of money today, we picture metal coins, paper bills, or digital bank balances. But the earliest currencies were not valuable because of what they were made of. They were valuable because of a story of shared belief. Ancient civilizations issued coins with a king's face not because the metal was rare, but because the king's power enforced their acceptance. That is the first secret of currency value. It is never about the object. It is about the authority behind it. In ancient Lydia, around 600 BC, King Alyattes issued some of the first standardized coins. Their value increased not because they held more gold, but because merchants believed the state would honor them. Meanwhile, in ancient China, emperors introduced paper money centuries before Europe. But each time an emperor wanted to strengthen or weaken the currency, he simply adjusted how much could be printed or how much silver it represented. Value was controlled by decree. Sound familiar? Even in Rome, the most powerful empire of its time, currency manipulation was the empire's favorite trick. Roman emperors repeatedly debased their currency, reducing the silver content of coins, while keeping their face value the same. Why? Because it allowed them to buy more grain, more weapons, and more loyalty without actually raising taxes. It worked beautifully, until the public realized their coins were worthless. The result? Hyperinflation, social chaos, and eventually, collapse. The common thread in these ancient systems is not the metal in the coins or the paper in the notes. It is the power to change the supply, to manipulate belief, to enforce acceptance, and to extract wealth silently. That is the foundation of currency value. Fast forward to the modern world, and the story has not changed. It has simply become more complex, more hidden, and more global. Today, currency value rises and falls for reasons most people never hear about: wars, interest rates, inflation targets, foreign exchange reserves, global demand, central bank interventions. These forces shape the price of your money every second of every day. Yet none of this is taught in school. Most people live their entire lives without understanding why their savings shrink or why their debt grows. And that ignorance is profitable. Because if you don't understand how currency value works, you can't understand inflation. You can't understand debt. You can't understand the banking system, central banks, or the forces that quietly transfer wealth upward decade after decade. Just like ancient Rome, modern currency manipulation is deliberate, strategic, and almost always invisible to the people paying the price. And that brings us to the twist in this story. Because the real mechanism behind rising and falling currency value is not history. It is power, mathematical, mechanical, and weaponized. And the people manipulating it, you won't believe the names. Here is the truth almost no one ever learns in school. Currency value doesn't change because of markets alone. Currency value changes because someone decides it should. And the institutions that make those decisions are not voted on, not publicly audited, and not accountable to the people whose lives they affect. This is where the story shifts. You've been taught that inflation just happens, that interest rates respond to economic conditions, and that currencies float freely on the global market. But behind those innocent phrases lies the most powerful financial machine humanity has ever built: central banking, the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, The Bank of Japan. These are not simply agencies, they are the quiet engineers of global value. And here's the twist most people never see coming. Currency value is not determined by how much a nation produces, but by how much money these institutions create or destroy. Yes, economies matter, but they are secondary. The primary force behind currency strength is the manipulation of money, supplied through a series of levers that almost no ordinary person understands. Interest rates, open market operations, quantitative easing, quantitative tightening, reserve requirements, foreign currency interventions, global demand for safe assets, dollar dominance. Each of these tools affects the supply and demand for a nation's currency. And when supply goes up, value goes down. When supply goes down, value goes up. But these decisions are not randomized. They are not purely economic. They are strategic. Here is the part that changes everything. When a central bank devalues its currency, wealth doesn't disappear. It transfers. The government's debt becomes cheaper. Corporations get easier loans. Banks benefit from inflated asset prices. And everyday people, the ones paid in that currency, watch their purchasing power erode silently, one grocery bill at a time. What looks like an economic trend is often a political decision. What looks like inflation is often a controlled burn. What looks like a crisis is often a reset. Once you understand this, currency value stops feeling like a mystery and starts looking like what it truly is, an engineered outcome designed to benefit those who control the supply of money. And this is where the story takes a darker turn. Because the mechanisms that change currency value today are not new. They are a modern upgrade of the same ancient tactics used by kings, emperors, and empires. But now, instead of a single emperor debasing coins, we have global institutions pressing buttons, shifting billions with a keystroke, adjusting interest rates with a sentence, and moving markets with a whisper. You think your money is safe in the bank. All it takes is one policy meeting in Washington, London, Tokyo, or Frankfurt, one decision behind closed doors, and the value of every dollar you own can drop, without a single coin ever leaving your hand. And the receipts behind these manipulations, they're wilder than you think. To understand how currency value increases or decreases, you have to step inside the machinery. Not the political slogans, not the headlines, the actual mechanics. Because the system is simple once you see it clearly, and terrifying once you see its implications. Let us start with the most important rule of currency value. Price is always about supply and demand. This is true whether we are talking about apples, diamonds, or US dollars. When supply goes up relative to demand, price falls. When supply goes down, price rises. But unlike apples or diamonds, currencies can have their supply changed instantly without mining, without farming, without production, just an entry on a balance sheet. That power alone is what makes currency manipulation so dangerous. 1. Money printing. The silent devaluer. When a central bank increases the supply of money through quantitative easing, stimulus, or debt monetization, the currency weakens. Why? Because more units of currency are now chasing the same goods. You don't feel the change immediately, but you feel it in prices rising slowly over time. This is why, between 2008 and 2022, the US money supply increased by more than 500% while wages lagged far behind. The dollar shrank in value not because the US economy failed, but because the supply of dollars exploded. Your money didn't lose value by accident. It lost value by design too. Interest rates. The currency accelerator. Raising interest rates increases the value of a currency. Why? Because higher rates attract global investors looking for returns. Demand for the currency rises, so its price rises. Lowering interest rates does the opposite. This is why countries slash rates during crises. They want weaker currency to stimulate exports, borrowing, and spending. Every time the Federal Reserve speaks, global currency markets move trillions, not because of economic conditions, but because of expectations of how tight or loose the money supply will be. 3. Inflation. The invisible tax. Inflation doesn't just affect grocery bills. It directly affects currency value. A country with high inflation sees its currency weaken relative to others. The reason is simple. Inflation means currency units buy less. Therefore, currency units are worth less. But here is the secret. Governments have incentives to cause inflation. After all, inflation makes debt cheaper. If the government owes $30 trillion, causing inflation reduces the real value of what it owes. You pay the price, they get the relief. Inflation is not a bug. Inflation is a feature. 4. Deflation, the economic guillotine. Deflation increases currency value, but it destroys economies. When prices fall, people stop spending, businesses stop investing, wages drop, debts become harder to pay. Japan experienced a deflation, airy spiral in the 1990s and never fully recovered. This is why governments fear deflation more than inflation. A strong currency sounds good until it crushes your economy. 5. Foreign exchange markets. The global battlefield currencies trade against each other on global markets, worth over $7 trillion per day. Speculators, hedge funds, and central banks constantly buy and sell currencies. A single rumor about interest rate changes can move exchange rates dramatically. In 1992, George Soros famously broke the Bank of England by shorting the British pound, forcing the UK to withdraw from the European exchange rate mechanism. One man moved the value of a national currency. If that doesn't show you how fragile currency value is, nothing will. 6. Reserve currencies. The dollar's dominance. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency, which means countries must hold it to buy oil, settle international debts, and store value. This global demand keeps the dollar strong, even when the US prints trillions. But what happens when countries like China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia begin trading outside of the dollar system? The answer is simple: the dollar weakens. And if that shift accelerates, we witness a global reset. 7. Confidence, the final, fragile ingredient ultimately. Currency value depends on belief. If people believe a currency is stable, it is stable. If people doubt it, it collapses overnight. This is why entire nations have imploded from currency crises. Weimar Germany, 1923 Zimbabwe, 2008 Argentina, repeatedly Turkey, last decade Venezuela. 2016 present currency value is not mathematical, it is psychological, and psychology can break instantly. When people think about money, they imagine something objective and mathematical, something governed by simple rules of economics. But currency value is not just a reflection of economic health. It is a reflection of power: who wields it, who benefits from it, and who pays for the decisions made at the top. Behind every rise and fall in currency value lies a series of choices made by institutions that the public rarely sees and almost never understands. Those choices ripple through grocery stores, rent prices, loan payments, and retirement accounts. They shape the daily experience of billions of people while remaining invisible to most of them. Currency value is affected by the supply of money, by interest rates, by inflation, and by global demand. But these forces are not mysterious. They are directed. When a central bank decides to create more money, the value of that money begins to drop long before ordinary people feel the effects. When interest rates are raised or lowered, the movement is not random. It is part of a deliberate attempt to push the economy in one direction or another. The public is told that these decisions are made to stabilize markets, to promote employment, or to secure long-term growth. Yet the consequences of these actions often benefit those who are already near the top. Increasing the money supply makes debts easier for governments to pay back, because the dollars used to repay those debts are worth less than the dollars borrowed. Corporations benefit because cheap money allows them to borrow endlessly, expand aggressively, and inflate their stock prices. Banks benefit because the assets they hold, real estate, equities, and financial products, tend to rise in price when money becomes abundant. Meanwhile, the people who live paycheck to paycheck experience this same system as rising rent, shrinking savings, and buying power that erodes quietly every year. One of the most powerful and least understood forces behind currency value is the global role of the US dollar. The dollar's status as the world's reserve currency guarantees constant international demand. Countries must hold dollars to buy oil, settle international debts, and conduct global trade. This demand props up the value of the dollar even when the United States prints money. On an unprecedented scale, the dollar remains strong not because it is inherently stable, but because the global financial system is built around it. When nations like China, Russia, or Saudi Arabia begin exploring alternatives to the dollar, the world takes notice. Even the smallest shift in confidence can send subtle tremors through the global currency market. But even this global system rests on a fragile foundation: belief. Currencies do not collapse because they run out of metal or because governments miscalculate. They collapse when people lose faith. Once confidence breaks, value evaporates at a speed that surprises even experts. Entire economies have been wiped out almost overnight by currency crises sparked by nothing more than a sudden loss of belief in the stability of the money. History is littered with such examples, from Weimar Germany to modern-day Venezuela. When the public stops trusting the currency, inflation turns into hyperinflation, and money becomes meaningless. This brings us to a profound and unsettling truth. The value of a currency is not anchored in gold or in economic output. It is anchored in trust in the system, trust in the institutions, and trust in the people who run them. And trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to restore. Once you recognize that currency value is controlled rather than naturally determined, the next question becomes unavoidable: controlled by whom and for what purpose? The answer is not a small group of villains hiding in a smoke-filled room, but a complex network of institutions, incentives, and power structures that have evolved over centuries. These institutions, central banks, governments, global financial organizations, and multinational corporations benefit enormously from the ability to influence currency value at will. When a currency is intentionally weakened, those closest to the financial system benefit first. Governments reduce the real cost of their debt. Large corporations borrow cheaply, expand aggressively, and acquire assets before the public notices the rising prices. Investors profit as stocks, real estate, and commodities increase in value. But as money flows upward, the cost of living quietly rises for everyone else. By the time prices visibly climb, wealth has already moved from the bottom of the economy to the top. This mechanism is often described as inflation, but inflation itself is only the symptom. The real process is a transfer of purchasing power from the public to the institutions that create and deploy new money. The newly printed money enters the economy through banks, government spending programs, and corporate credit facilities. It reaches ordinary people last, after prices have risen. By then, the value has already been extracted. Meanwhile, when a currency strengthens sharply, it tends to harm exporters, workers, and small businesses whose goods become more expensive in global markets. Strong currencies can trigger layoffs, bankruptcies, and recessions, even as they make imports cheaper for wealthier consumers. In both directions, whether strengthening or weakening the manipulation of currency value has winners and losers, but the winners tend to be those who understand and influence the system, while the losers are those who simply work within it. The cycle repeats throughout history, often disguised as economic necessity or accidental turbulence, but the pattern is unmistakable. Empires have manipulated their currencies to fund wars, expand territories, and suppress revolts. Monarchs debase their coins to escape debt. Nations on the brink of collapse have printed money to delay the inevitable. Modern central banks engineer inflation targets and adjust interest rates with the same strategic intentionality that ancient rulers applied when shaving silver off their coins. What makes the modern era unique is the scale and speed of these manipulations. Money no longer needs to be minted, transported, or physically altered. A single central bank announcement can shift trillions of dollars in seconds. Entire currencies can rise or fall based on the wording of a speech. Even rumors can destabilize economies. The public sees none of this. They simply feel the effects: rising prices, shrinking savings, unstable paychecks, and the creeping sense that no matter how hard they work, their money seems to buy less each year. As long as the public believes that currency value is determined naturally and not engineered, they will blame themselves for the struggles caused by these manipulations. That belief is the system's greatest protective shield. But once you understand the cycle, the pattern becomes impossible to unsee. If history teaches us anything, it is that no currency system remains stable forever. Values rise, values fall, and eventually, they reset. Every empire has experienced this cycle. Every nation, no matter how powerful, has faced the consequences of manipulating its currency. The question is not whether the next shift will come, but when and whether the public will recognize it before it happens. We are living in an era of unprecedented money creation. Central banks have expanded balance sheets by trillions. Governments have borrowed sums once considered unthinkable. Inflation, once dismissed as temporary, has become a persistent force. Confidence in global institutions is eroding, and major powers are questioning the dominance of the dollar. The ingredients for a currency shift are gathering like storm clouds. The lesson of history is not that these systems collapse suddenly. It is that they erode slowly and then fail all at once. People often sense the instability long before they understand it. They notice their savings buying less. They notice prices rising faster than wages. They notice debt becoming unavoidable. This is not coincidence. It is the natural consequence of a system built to extract value quietly, predictably, and systematically. But awareness is the first defense. When you understand how currency value is engineered, you begin to see the world differently. You recognize the warning signs before they become headlines. You understand inflation not as a mysterious force, but as a deliberate choice. You see interest rate changes not as economic reactions, but as strategic moves. You recognize currency strength and weakness as tools of political and financial warfare. The final question, then, is the one that matters most. Are we wiser now than past civilizations? Or are we walking the same path in better suits? Let me know where you're watching from, and if this opened your eyes. And if you want more deep dives into the hidden forces shaping your money, make sure you subscribe. The story of currency is not finished. It's only becoming more dangerous.